Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hope and thank you so much for joining me today as we talk about the books that raised me. Pretty much what that means is books that were the most formative for you, and there are certain categories that I have put these in to sort of break it down and specify a little bit more. I would love to turn this into a tag. Hopefully nobody has done something exactly like this before. I'm sure there's been things similar. The tag is going to be called Books That Raised Me, and I'm going to tag just a few people in the description below. I'm new to booktube, so I may know you, but you may not know me. I just thought it'd be fun to talk about some of the books that form my reading now, and I think we can all agree that the things that we grew up reading will definitely, we lean more towards those things in our adulthood. First category that I had was the earliest book that I remember reading. It is Little House on the Prairie. I do not have the physical copy, but I do remember having this set of books growing up in my house. I have a specific memory of me finding the book inside of a moving box in our basement. I was probably in like 4th grade and sitting down on a cardboard box and like starting the book and just loving it. And so that was the first book that I remember reading and deciding like, okay, I'm going to be a reader. The earliest book that I remember being enchanted by, and enchanted means like, can mean different things. It can mean, you know, that endeared me to reading, or just was a very whimsical book, the most whimsical book I had read up to that point. And that book was The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I remember reading this when I was in 4th grade, just being very drawn in by the world. Of course, it's Lewis, and so the writing is absolutely impeccable. And when you get older, you sort of can see more of the underlying messages and themes that you miss, of course, when you're 10 or 9 years old. I just remember loving this book, loving the characters, wanting to be like Lucy when I was a little girl, and just loving the scenery, loving the portal fantasy element, you know, entering through the wardrobe and there being another world. The first time I remember reading about something that I had wanted to read about but didn't know that I wanted, and that was this. The next one is the first character in a book that I wanted to swap places with. I remember absolutely just loving this book, and it is Ingo by Helen Dunmore, and this is the first in a series, and this is about a mermaid, as you can see from the cover. And I don't remember when this was published. I feel like before the mermaid stuff like started getting very popular. It was published in 2005, so I can't remember. Anyways, this is the first character that I wished that I could swap places with, and I have the other books here. The second one is The Deep, and then The Tide Knot, and then there I think are 2 others, or maybe one other after this. So I believe it's either a quartet or a quintet. This was the book that made me fall in love with a certain genre. So that is the next category. And that genre is science fiction. And that book is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. This copy was actually the copy that I had growing up. And this was a little later in my life. And it took me a long time to finish this book because it is 324 pages. So this may have actually been the longest book, like outside of school, that I remember reading. I just, again, was very engaged with the genre specifically and loved science fiction after reading this book. And this is a special copy because one of my teachers from my high school actually wrote a special note in here for me and gave this to me, which was very kind of her. Okay, the next category is when you see this book, it brings about the most nostalgia, a time period in your life. That book is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is a classic. I mean, everybody has heard about To Kill a Mockingbird, but I just remember this being read at a specific time in my life and it being nostalgic for that purpose. Every time I see this book, it brings me back to those days. This next category, I actually have 2 books because I could not choose between the 2. Just a pause as well. This is not these are not the only books that like got me into reading or that raised me. I definitely have a pretty long list. I remember having books in my house growing up. My mom was very great about just having a ton of books. We went to the library all the time, and so I read a lot of books growing up. Of course, I can't remember. These are the ones that that are either on my physical shelf that I can recall that have the most impression when I look at them. The next category is the first book that you can remember that changed your mind about something. Those two books are Desiring God by John Piper and Confessions by St. Augustine. So when I was a senior in high school, I wrote a senior thesis on Christian hedonism, and this was one of the resources that I used. And of course, I even have some notes and like tabs left from the research that I did in St. Augustine's Confessions as well. Just remembered being very transformed by St. Augustine's theological positions on many things that I had not been exposed to yet up to that point. I was about 17 when I read these two books. Really just shifted my perspective in my faith and my walk with the Lord, in that if God was to be glorified in my life, then he would be the thing that I loved and desired and had the most affection for. And rather than my faith and my relationship with the Lord being something like humdrudgery and something that I just had to push through and that I dreaded, this book changed my perspective on that. Is that no, God is actually what my heart most longs and desires for. There's a favorite quote that I have in this book by St. Augustine. I think I can remember it, and it goes along the lines of, "Oh, our hearts are restless until we rest in you, O Lord." Next book that I can remember, Devouring. And mostly because it was a smaller book. I think I read this book in like one sitting. The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. If you've not read this book, it is really short. It's like a little over 100 pages. I think I remember reading this on the beach. The prose I really enjoy. Some people are not really big fans of Hemingway's prose because it is a little, like for the time it was written in, it was very much deviated from the flowery element that was going on. I don't find that his writing is very flowery. Sometimes that's nice. Sometimes I enjoy that. The next category is the most difficult books I remember completing, and that gave me confidence that I can read some more difficult books and books that have more depth. Paradise Lost by John Milton. This was before like audiobooks were a thing, and I remember having to finish this for school and being like, this is so long, I cannot get through this. And so I remember finding like a college or university that had recorded a live reading of this book and like listening to it in the morning. It's like before I would go to school. The other one obviously is Beowulf. This translation is by Frederick Rebsamen. And the one that I read, though, was by Seamus Heaney. So I've not read this, but I bought this at McKay's. But this is Beowulf. This is also a poem. So this is really good if you have not read it before. It's also very short. This book is belonging to a category that I'm going to call books that made you understand or feel most understood, whether in a positive or negative light. And if you read this book, you'll know what I mean when I say that. Understand the human condition more. And that is Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. I remember what grade I was in. I believe I was in 8th grade. I did not know that books could so it's almost like a coming of age book. And that is that for me, for this book. I think I've read it twice, and I would like to read it again. But I love this book. That concludes the video. I hope that you enjoyed. I would love to hear in the comments some of the books that you remember changing you. Feel free to use the categories that I use. I'll also list those in the description below. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you the next one.
Oh, you could come home, it's not too